Well, like I said, thank you for being here today. Our peer call is focused on Basin Roundtables 101. So if you were curious about what the Basin Roundtables are or how you can get engaged, um, this is the call for you. And great spelling error on my part. It's roundtable, not round table. Um, all right, so before we jump into the peer call, I wanted to just share a little bit about River Network and the work we do in Colorado too, for those of you who aren't as familiar. River Network is a national organization, and we work to grow and strengthen a transformational network of water justice and river advocates. We host events online that are meant for a national audience here today, and my work is really focused in Colorado. But we also have a plethora of tools and resources that are meant for you. So please check out our website. Oops. One of the things that River Network is known for, as an organization that's been around for 33 years, is River Rally. So we have our next River Rally coming up in May of 2026 in San Antonio. If you've never been, this is a really neat and fun event. We make space for celebrating, inspiring one another, and learning from one another on the skills that we all utilize and need as water professionals. So check that out. Hope to see you there. And I bring up membership for River Network just because if you do want to go to River Rally, you get a discount if you become a River Network member. So you can learn more about that on your own. Um, for the purposes of my work, which I don't remember if I said my name. My name is Chelsea Silva. I lead our watershed planning peer learning network, which is a space for anybody in Colorado who's leading watershed planning or watershed project implementation to engage. We offer peer calls like this. We do field trips. And we essentially are working to create space for you to meet each other, learn from one another, and continue to engage as watershed planning professionals in the state. We host a website called coloradosmp.org. If you haven't seen that before, you should check it out. No matter what stage of the planning process that you might be in, this is a resource for you to go in there and find out the tools and tips we have for doing watershed planning. If you're not part of our network already, which you probably are because you're here today and you somehow got my email to join this call. But if you're not, you can sign up to join this network using this URL. And I'll provide these after the call, so don't worry about jotting that down quickly. The Peer Learning Network has a few upcoming events in March. We're still figuring out the date, but we'll have another peer call, and that will focus on an analysis that River Network recently led, where we interviewed funders throughout the state of Colorado to understand how they're supporting capacity initiatives led by small organizations throughout the state who are doing watershed planning. So we welcome you to join that. And then my favorite, in August of next year, we're going to host a field trip in the Roaring Fork Valley with Roaring Fork Conservancy. So strongly encourage you to come to that. There's no better way to engage with this network and with your peers than through an in-person field trip. Lastly, when it comes to events with the Peer Learning Network, and very relevant to this group, is that over the course of the early winter, I guess late winter and early spring of next year, River Network will be providing presentations to each of the roundtables. We've already gone to two of them, but these ones that are listed are the ones that are next on our radar. And we invite you to join us for those meetings. We'll be presenting on the important and amazing work that watershed planning leads have been doing in each of these regions, and also giving the Basin Roundtables an opportunity to see where we see other places that might be in need of planning and projects. So come out for that. it will be my colleague Brian Murphy with River Network at those presentations, and then Chris Sturm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. One more thing I'd like to share with you is that right now, with support from Colorado Water Conservation Board, River Network is offering support services. We see these as a little bit of help along the way as you're doing your planning and project implementation. We have services in term that are focused on technical consultations and assistance, and also organizational support and facilitation consultations. We do this free of charge, first come, first serve, and usually those services end up looking like 1 to 3 hours of time with one of our teammates to help you through your challenge. We've worked with people to help them think through how to design river health assessments, how to design stakeholder engagement processes, how to think about the first steps and like a process for a strategic plan. So it runs the gamut of things that we can support you with, and we invite you to reach out to us and work with us through these services. So for today, now that you've heard my spiel, our call today will focus on learning about Basin Roundtables and how you can impact statewide planning through the Basin Implementation Plans. We're also going to help you learn how you can use the Basin Implementation Plans to help them understand your values and priorities, and how the Roundtable's values and priorities fit in with your work. And we're also here to build a community practice. So in a minute, I'm going to pass the mic to Jeff Rodriguez with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, who will give you some background information on the Basin Roundtables. And then we'll turn it over to Carrie Paget with Harris Water Engineering to hear from a peer on her lessons learned and experiences from working with the Southwest Basin Roundtable. And Carrie wears multiple hats, so she's got a pretty great background on the kinds of lessons that she can share with us. We will have time for Q&A, but if you have questions along the way, please drop those in the chat. Otherwise, we'll give you a chance to raise your hand later on and ask your questions. Before I pass it to Jeff, 4 group agreements for you today. So we're here to learn, engage, and share. And our first agreement is to be present. So I know that it can be easy to answer your last minute emails or work on a presentation while you're at these kinds of webinars. But we invite you to put those things aside, take the time that you signed up for to join us, and learn from Jeff and Carrie and engage with your peers. Second is to respect our diversity. We all come to this space with different experiences and knowledge, and we respect those differences and embrace them in the dialogue that we'll have today. Third is to listen, to understand, and respond with curiosity. It can be easy if somebody says something that you disagree with to knee-jerk reaction, just immediately stop listening. But I invite you to listen with all your heart to what people are saying and open your mind and be curious about what they're saying, so that we can be here and learn together. The fourth is share the air. This is a virtual space, so this is less relevant, but if you're somebody who asks lots and lots of questions, just remember that there might be other people who are curious and want to ask questions as well. So take a minute before you drop 15 questions in the chat. Let other people be part of the conversation. Okay, with that, Jeff, I'm going to pass it to you to present your slides.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. While I'm pulling up the screen share here, can I get a thumbs up that you can see that? Great. Well, thanks for having me today. As Chelsea mentioned, I'm Jeff Rodriguez. I work in the water supply planning section for the Colorado Water Conservation Board. I work primarily with the 9 Basin Roundtables and the Interbasin Compact Committee, but the water supply planning section is in charge of writing, maintaining, updating, implementing the water plan. So our section kind of is all hands on deck for all things water plan. So we kind of all do a little bit of everything. I'm going to start today just kind of, I like to start these presentations giving a little bit of overview of who CWCB is in sort of the state government landscape, what we do, a little bit of history of kind of how we got to where we're at today. So for some of you who attend Basin Roundtable meetings a lot, Scott, or work for CWCB, Andrea, this might be a good time to get some coffee or work on one of those presentations or something like that. But who knows, you might learn something new. So the CWCB is Colorado's water policy agency and has been for the last, I don't know, 85 plus years. We work on a wide range of problems, which focus on everything from protecting Colorado's streams and lakes, flood mitigation, watershed protection, stream restoration, drought planning, water supply planning, water project financing. We have a section that's dedicated to interstate water issues. So things like the recovery program, interstate compacts, all of those things. So the agency, we're a staff of, I think we're up to maybe 70 or so now. And we kind of work on a wide variety of water issues. Our mission is to conserve, develop, protect, and manage Colorado's water for present and future generations. We have a board of directors, which represents each of the major river basins in Colorado, the city and county of Denver, and then we have some non-voting board members as well, the director of CWCB, the commissioner of agriculture, the director of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the attorney general, and then also the director of DNR is also on the board. There might be one that I'm forgetting, but so when you hear people refer to CWCB, sometimes they're referring to the agency as a whole. Sometimes they're referring to CWCB staff like myself and Andrea. Sometimes they're referring to the board of directors themselves. So you kind of have to read between the lines a little bit when you're looking at something either or listening to people talk about CWCB, but it's sort of all the same thing. What we do is we provide direction on water policy. We're not a regulatory agency or an enforcement agency, so we end up working with a lot of other state agencies or partner groups on policy and projects. But we don't build projects ourselves as an agency, but we do provide a high number of funding opportunities for all of those different projects. In Colorado, we currently coordinate water planning at the state level, but that hasn't always been the case. And the foundations of statewide water planning really go back to the 2002 drought. As you can see here in the picture, that's a picture of Cheeseman Reservoir. Really low, extremely low. Colorado was really deep in drought. And drought's something we experience now pretty much annually on different scales. But at the time, the forests near Cheeseman Reservoir were really parched when the Hayman fire struck. And at the time, it was the largest wildfire on record in Colorado up until 2020. The fire had dramatic impacts on water supplies, washing ash and sediment into reservoirs and impacting both water quality and the collection system infrastructure to deliver water to customers. These impacts highlighted the need for a statewide approach to planning for water resources in Colorado. And on the slide here, this is just a quote that I like to put in here. Governor Owens at the time said it looked like all of Colorado was burning. And our statewide water planning approach really comes from a critical need to face climate related challenges that are not unlike what we're grappling with still to this day. So, on the heels of the 2002 fire, we had the Water for the 21st Century Act in 2005, which created the Basin Roundtables and the Interbasin Compact Committee. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But, we were sort of since then moving towards more of a statewide approach. So we had the water supply statewide water supply initiative, which we call SWASI. It's just an acronym. That really was sort of the first iteration of a statewide water plan, or really all these groups coming together to kind of think about water on a statewide scale. And then sort of the progression of that really led up to 2013, where we had some pretty devastating flooding impacts in Colorado. And Governor Hickenlooper issued an executive order directing CWCB to develop the first ever Colorado water plan. Hickenlooper's order kind of kicked off a grassroots process where each Basin Roundtable wrote a locally led plan, which were called the Basin Implementation Plans. And then we at CWCB used those plans to develop the original statewide Colorado Water Plan, which was released in 2015. It was a long process. It took 3 drafts and about 30,000 public comments to create the final product that we released in 2015. So we just released the second iteration of the water plan, well, not just in 2023 now. So it's 2 years in the making now. We are in the midst of trying to implement what's in the water plan. For that new update, we really looked at the plan as an opportunity to shine a light on our most critical water issues in Colorado, and also our biggest opportunities to collaborate with local partners and to mitigate risk. So what is the Colorado Water Plan? I mentioned it's an opportunity to partner. It really sets the stage for collaboration and mitigating risk, and sort of serves as like this guiding document to allow us all to sort of be moving in the same direction. But also it's a strategy document for CWCB. It's a planning document and operation strategy for our agency, and it highlights ways we partner with other agencies who are really leading in the action areas of the plan, which if you're not familiar, the Colorado Water Plan's sort of organized into 4 different action areas: robust agriculture, which is actions, solutions, strategies, data on agriculture in Colorado; vibrant communities, which is really focused on our municipal interests and having really strong cities and towns in Colorado. Then you have a resilient planning section, which is really focused on sort of where we're headed, and also kind of where we're at today. And then you also have a thriving watersheds, which is really focused on watershed health, but sort of more of a holistic picture of what watershed health is, sort of across the state. So, the water plan really is just a collection of resources and sort of strategy. And so the water plan is a great place for folks to start, and it creates knowledge sharing, and really informs some of the really engaging conversations that we have across the state. I put up on the screen here a quote from our CWCB director from the Arkansas Basin when I think this was during the release of the water plan, but he was just really pointing out like what the water plan is supposed to do and how local conversations kind of fit into that. So I'm gonna talk now about the Basin Roundtables. So the Water for the First 21st Century Act, which I mentioned, came in 2005 on the heels of the Haven Fire and the 2002 drought. But the act created 9 basin roundtables, one for each of the 8 major river basins in Colorado, and then kind of a carve out of the South Platte Basin for the Denver metro area. It also established the Interbasin Compact Committee, which is made up of representatives from each of the 9 basin roundtables, and then 6 appointees from the governor, and then 2 legislative members. And so that Interbasin Compact Committee is sort of a statewide body, which really helps shape numerous planning and policy initiatives and challenges within and across the 9 basin roundtables. And that's where the public education, participation, and outreach portion of the Water for the 21st Century Act kind of lives within that sort of statewide umbrella in the IBCC. All of this has kind of evolved over the last 20 years a little bit. But the basin roundtables have kind of stayed pretty much the same as they were envisioned in this document here. But so CWCB's role with the basin roundtables is, we coordinate with both of those groups, the basin roundtables and the IBCC. But we really try to foster kind of this grassroots level, local level engagement in water issues and how those can be elevated to maybe a statewide conversation. But it's really represents the importance of local partnerships and collaboration moving forward, the important work really at the local level. So Basin roundtables, as I mentioned, still functioning today. Each roundtable has kind of a set of seats that fluctuate in number based on the basin's geography. So there's sort of 2 different aspects of a basin roundtable. You have your voting seats, which are appointed seats for each county within the boundaries of the Basin Roundtable. And then each county gets a municipal rep as well. So 2 representatives from each county within the boundaries of the Basin Roundtable. Then the roundtables have 10 at-large seats. 5 of those have really specific requirements. So there's an environmental at-large, a local domestic water provider, a agriculture at large rep, and then a recreation rep as well. And there is one more at large seat that is designated in the act that I'm forgetting right now. And then there are 5 others that are basically just all of these are elected by the Basin Roundtable themselves. And then there are seats for each water conservation or conservancy district within the boundaries of the Basin Roundtable as well. And then there's really what we call liaisons to the Basin Roundtable, which I'm one of them for the CWCB, but there's really no limit to liaisons or participation from other interested parties. Every Basin Roundtable meeting is a public meeting. They allow for public comment. And I think, whether you have a seat or not, you can engage and participate in those meetings and discussions. So I mentioned this before, but one of the many efforts that CWCB is tasked with is maintaining and updating the Colorado Water Plan. This is a really iterative process and effort, and the CWCB really relies heavily on the Basin Roundtables and other folks engaged in water across the state. But the Basin Roundtables really do provide an on-the-ground basin context and analysis of the data from the tech update or the analysis and technical update that ultimately rolls up into the statewide water plan. So on the screen here, you can kind of see the different iterations of statewide water planning starting in 2015. But I mentioned, before 2015, we had two statewide water supply initiatives. Then the no and low regrets in 2013, which I'll talk a little bit more about in here in a little bit, but then really culminating with that first actual statewide water plan in 2015. And then we kind of just jumped right back into the process again and started updating the water plan. We rebranded the statewide water supply initiative as the analysis and technical update, which is all of the data that underpins the water plan. So that is, modeling results for sort of where we're headed in the future. We use a scenario planning approach, and we, forecast out sometimes 30 years. I think in the 2023 plan, we're projecting out to 2050. And so those different scenarios have different drivers that really change what demand and water supply looks like across the state. We take that data, we sort of hand it over to the Basin Roundtables, maybe with a little bit of direction and oversight from CWCB, and then the Basin Roundtables get together and create what's called the Basin Implementation Plans, which are, as I mentioned before, really locally focused planning documents, that are really basin specific. All of that information gets rolled up into the statewide water plan. I have the progress report on here too. We published this report last year in January. And that really just kind of demonstrates what the agency is doing, what our partners are doing to implement the water plan, and sort of how we're moving that forward. Down on the bottom of the screen here, all of these different groups, so technical advisory groups, implementation working groups, water plan scoping workshops, that all is sort of different pieces and parts of this water plan update that we go through during the process. It takes about 7 years to complete the whole process. And now with the implementation of the 2023 water plan, we're kind of on a 10-year cycle. So 7 years to complete the update, basically, and then kind of 3 years to start the implementation before we get right back into updating the water plan again, starting with the tech update and kind of refining what the data looks like and adding new data from the past and all of those things. So I'm going to jump into kind of where we're at right now in this process. We're somewhere, I don't know if can you see my mouse? You can. Okay. So we're somewhere right in here. If you just imagine this, keep going. So we're somewhere right in here, and we're taking a little bit different tact this year than we have in the past. We are modernizing the no and low regrets document that I mentioned from 2013. So that document, just a little bit of an overview, that was created by the Interbasin Compact Committee and really was a collection of kind of statewide strategies that are low hanging fruit, consensus across the state that these are the things that we should be pursuing or should be pursuing in 2013. They kind of cast a 10 to 15-year horizon. And so when we were doing the 2023 water plan, that document didn't get incorporated into the water plan as a standalone thing. It it really, in 2013, that executive order from Governor Hickenlooper came right as the IBCC was kind of finalizing their no and low regret strategy. So basically, CWCB pivoted, swept up the no and low regrets, and really kind of put all of that into the first water plan. And so as we were updating that water plan, we kind of saw that those no and low regret strategies were really kind of sprinkled throughout the 2015 water plan, the Basin Implementation Plans, and then ultimately incorporated into the water plan just in kind of pieces and parts. So the IBCC last June decided that maybe it's time to modernize this work for a number of different reasons, and really start focusing on what we're looking towards for the next water plan, which is expected to come out in 2033. But really, these are strategies to address the up to 740,000 acre foot gap that is projected in the 2023 water plan. And so what those strategies to make sure that Colorado can thrive under any future might look like. We want to build resilience to long-term warming and drying trends that we're seeing, and we want to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction as we approach the next tech update, the next round of Basin Implementation Plan updates, and ultimately the next water plan. So I think also sort of built into this is hoping to build a space for collaboration, some momentum for project funding, kind of reinvigorate the Basin Roundtables and their impact on statewide water planning and the IBCC, and also just sort of start from the ground up and really focus on kind of where we're headed. So the no and low regrets is not something we just made up. Well, maybe we just made it up, but it really is a concept used in scenario planning, kind of across the spectrum of folks who use scenario planning. And what a no and low regret is something that offers benefits across a wide range of future uncertainties. So sort of options that will provide benefit across future climate scenarios or development scenarios. It focuses, these things really focus on co-benefits across sectors and stakeholders, minimizing trade-offs and maximizing benefits, to folks who manage and use water differently across the state. But most importantly, they offer flexibility for future change. And I think this is really kind of tied into the first one. That flexibility is really important because in scenario planning, you plan for 3 different scenarios, or in the case of the 2023 plan, 5 different scenarios. And then a lot of folks, when you're thinking about a plan, just go to sort of what's the worst case scenario, let's plan for that. But, for it to be a no and low regret, it really needs to have some flexibility to really work under any future scenario. So what does the no and low regrets process look like? Right now, we're just starting this effort. And this graphic on the screen is what we envision the process to look like. We have a schedule that we developed with the IBCC to kind of tackle these really large water topics over the next 2 to 3 years. Um, but we really imagine that this effort will really start at the Basin Roundtable level, and those ideas that come out of those local challenges that folks are seeing around a given topic, like supporting Colorado's agriculture. Let's just use that as a topic. Will be discussed at the local level and then brought to the IBCC to be discussed at more of a statewide level and try to generate consensus about these options. So IBCC reps will take the ideas generated at the Basin Roundtable to IBCC meetings, to kind of review what those ideas are and start to generate consensus, kind of pushing and pulling those local ideas into what makes maybe a statewide strategy to move forward. This will be an iterative process that we'll go through for each of those topics. And then we'll kind of circle back on the ideas that generated consensus or didn't generate consensus. So IBCC will take those ideas that have some statewide consensus around them and kind of refine them into a potential no and low regret strategy. Anything else that didn't get there will kind of filter right back down to the Basin Roundtables to maybe be incorporated into the Basin Implementation Plans. Like I said, it's going to be an iterative process over the next few years. But we really envision that this no and low regret strategy, which will set sort of the next 10 to 15 year time horizon, will really be incorporated into the statewide water planning cycle. So this graphic here kind of shows how we're thinking this type of work could be incorporated into the statewide water planning cycle. Integrating these no and low regrets into the tech update, the basin implementation plans, and then ultimately the water plan. So we're kind of hoping that this work can be incorporated into the water plan, just like the 2013 document was, as we're looking out to 2033. So over the next 3 years, I mentioned we'll be having iterative conversations at the Basin Roundtables. So right now is a great time to be getting involved in the Basin Roundtables, regardless of, if you have a seat or not. Being engaged at that level during these no and low regret conversations will be a really great place to kind of impact what the next decade of statewide water planning looks like. I imagine that this type of work will lend itself to a lot of really interesting presentations on particular topics at the Basin Roundtable level, and some really robust discussions about what these topics look like in each basin on a local level. So, it's a 2 to 3 year time horizon, a lot of different topics, which I'm thinking now I should have put up the list of topics, but there is room to get involved either throughout the whole process or just, if there's a topic that's really interesting to you. I think for this group, there'll be lots of conversations about watershed health and post-fire recovery and fire mitigation and things like that. Talking about environmental and recreation values in each of the basins. So I think there's a lot of room to get involved. And, we really do need your help. There's a lot of folks on the Basin Roundtables, but it's not everyone, right? There's a limited amount of seats. Most of them are appointed. And so really getting folks who are doing work on the ground, who are doing projects, engaged in these conversations, will be really helpful to create kind of a more robust no and low regrets strategy document for Colorado. So get involved. at your local Basin Roundtable level. Like I said, it might be hard to get a voting seat right away, but the seats turn over or sort of come up on a term every 5 years, theoretically, sometimes 2 years. So being engaged and being around is a really great way to eventually get one of those voting seats if you want one in the future. So, but if you're a project focused person, like I imagine a lot of you are on this call here, great time to get involved, to think about, how can you create projects that take these no and low regret strategies and implement them. Talking about your experience implementing projects, I think will be a really big part of these discussions as well. We've just started this effort and already half of the Basin Roundtables have already gotten to, well, how do we implement some of these projects, or what are some project ideas that might fit under these no and low regret strategies? So I think being engaged is really important. I've mentioned this a few times and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. We are charting the course for the next decade of statewide water planning right now. I think of this no and low regrets effort as sort of a scoping effort for the next water plan. And so it's a great time to get involved. And probably a little bit easier to get involved at the Basin Roundtable and have your voice and your ideas heard, because this is sort of like an all hands on deck effort and it's going to take all of us here. So we're really focused on that. I think, where I spend most of my time is really trying to foster these local level grassroots ideas, and how to implement them into statewide water planning. And so I'll just leave you with this. Our director from the Arkansas Valley again, had a great quote, talking about how these local things really do influence and provide the foundation for the statewide water planning. Um, you know, we make the plan, we think about statewide water issues all the time, but the magic and the projects really do happen at the local level. So I'll pass it over to Carrie, to kind of talk more about that. And then, yeah, be around for questions.
Thanks, Jeff. And I talked to Carrie, and we wanted to give you as an audience a chance to breathe and engage. So, if anybody has any questions for Jeff, we will take like two, maybe three questions, and then we'll pass it to Carrie.
Sounds good.
Laura.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for that. I'm curious how education and raising awareness grew through those years of developing different phases of the water plan.
Yeah,
And that's just a general question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so in the original 20 Water for the 21st Century Act, education is one of those things that's specifically called out as part of the work for the Interbasin Compact Committee. So that started with sort of a small, what we call PEPO work group within the IBCC, and that has really evolved over the years. So started there at CWCB, we've sort of massaged it into something else, where now we have specific education and outreach practitioners for each basin, so a basin coordinator, and then so that we provided a really small amount of funding for each one of them. Folks were doing really great work with basically no money. And then in 2021, we sort of re-envisioned the Water Supply Reserve Fund grant program and attached some PEPO funding onto that. And so now the PEPO program is a grant program, which provides $25,000 for each basin coordinator grant. And then it also has a statewide grant program attached to it. So practitioners can apply to be basin coordinators if they want to do that, really focused on the work of the Basin Roundtables. There's also that statewide grant opportunity that I mentioned, which is, to support education, outreach, participation initiatives that have more of like a regional focus or a statewide focus. So that's kind of the education and outreach attached to the Basin Roundtables. We also have an education bucket in the water plan grant program as well. And so I would say that education and sort of those initiatives happen sort of within the Basin Roundtables on one level, outside of the Basin Roundtables on another level. And then, CWCB funds other organizations that are doing sort of statewide water education, like Water Education Colorado and things like that. So I think it's sort of still evolving. There's a lot more resources out there now. But I think, with this transition to the PEPO program being a grant program, there's still some transition happening. What we would love to see is a really competitive PEPO application program for each Basin Roundtable. So, multiple practitioners putting together an education plan that could be funded through the through the Basin Roundtables, through that PEPO grant program. I think that's the direction we're headed. We're not quite there yet, but I think that's still really evolving. And as we all know, water education in Colorado has been happening for a long time. I kind of think of it as like we're on like a 10-year lag. People have to be hearing the same message for like a decade before, we start watering our lawns less and and things like that. So still hearing the same message. Nobody's telling us to turn the tap off when we brush our teeth anymore because we've heard that message for the last 10 years and now most people do that, I would assume. So yeah, I think that's where we're headed.
Right. If no one else has a question, I just have a follow-up. So I noticed you said that you provide support for Water Education Colorado. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And they have a statewide water education action plan. Is that associated with the state's water plan, or is that separate?
That's a good question. Carrie might be able to answer that too. Carrie does some work with the PEPO program. I think, I don't know if that's directly associated with the water plan. I would imagine that there are some principles and things like that incorporated in that that really align with the water plan.
Yeah, and this is just like funding. My question is funding focused because our basin also has a basin education action plan, and it's hard to like fully understand what should be guiding us as we are applying for funding through the water plan.
Yeah, so I think those kind of basin education action plans are kind of a relic now. I think there's some really good information in there. And I don't think like a ton of the education work has sort of shifted from those principles in most of those basin education action plans. But since the PEPO program, that used to be kind of a main focus was to create these basin education action plans. And now, since it's shifted towards a grant program, those plans have kind of been incorporated into the basin implementation plans, but really are sort of moving away from that into these annual grants that are really focused on education in the basin. So I wouldn't say like totally throw out the Basin Education Action Plan. I think there's a lot of really good information in there, but now we're kind of focused more on these year to year education plans for each basin through the PEPO grant program. I don't know, Carrie, did I get that right? Or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd punt it to Shannon because she helped me with my Peppo project. She was lead on that actually, but yeah, I think you got it right. I don't know if Shannon has anything to add about the WECO one versus the state. Thanks, Shannon, for being on the spot.
Just no problem. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as Carrie said, I'm with Strategic by Nature, and I helped Carrie with the PEPO project of doing an assessment. And yes, the WECO one is not it was done as a separate project by Water Education Colorado as a guide that could be utilized. But to what Jeff said, the PEPO program allows each of the basins to utilize what they need since all the basins are unique to one another. So it doesn't necessarily have to be incorporated into a PEPO grant or into the planning process.
yeah, I think if you're applying for funding through the CWCB, the focus is on, well, so we've got a number of different funding programs. If you're going for water supply reserve fund funding, which kind of filters through the basin roundtables, focus on those basin implementation plans. There's education goals in most of them, if not all of them. If you're applying for a water plan grant, then we have in the water plan this section called partner actions, which is a list of 50 kind of large topic areas for projects that we see will help implement the water plan. There's 50 on there because we have 50 agency action. So, we wanted a balance there. But that 50 is really just a limitless list of opportunities to help push the water plan and the goals in the water plan forward. So if you're applying for grant funding through CWCB, I focus on those two things. When we look at water plan grants, we love to see those partner action areas highlighted. If you highlight things in the basin implementation plan, we like to see that too. What I think makes it easier for us is if you just put it in your application that this is, going to help with this partner action and push these goals of the water plan forward. So we don't have to kind of look for it and infer like this is the thing we think you're going for. It's really helpful if you just tell us.
Thank you, Jeff and Shannon and Carrie, and thank you, Laura, for your questions. I'm gonna hand it now to Carrie to share her presentation, and I'm very excited about it, so stick around.
All right, that's a lot of pressure, Chelsea. We'll see how it goes. I think, as Chelsea mentioned, I've worn a lot of hats, so this is probably just a story of my life for the last 15 years, and you guys can see all the ways I've interacted with the roundtable. So to begin with, I was just going to do a little introduction about myself, and then describe the kind of areas I've been able to interact and benefit from my relationship with the roundtable. That includes being a roundtable member, being a local expert on the Basin Implementation Plans, helping manage the project database, and then I have just a couple success stories of how I've seen us implement work from that grassroots perspective that Jeff has mentioned. So just a little bit about myself and to get to know me. I'm a water resource engineer in Durango, Colorado. I work at Harris Water Engineering. I've been working in the industry for 18 years. I served as a roundtable, and I'm glad Jeff said these, the local domestic water provider at large seat for 10 years was the seat I held. And that's because in my day job, I helped design drinking water systems. And so I had that expertise. I was part of the Basin Implementation Plan development teams and one of the leads for those. So I helped complete the first BIP in 2015. I was part of the team for the 2020, and then I'm also on the team for the future update in 2031. And then as part of kind of my roles with the Roundtable, I also serve as a community navigator for Southwestern Water Conservation District's Water Conservation and Infrastructure Partnership, a nice mouthful name of a group that we all love. And I manage and regularly update that project database as one of my roles. So again, another connection to the Roundtable. And then kind of my other key point as part of being a member of the Roundtable and then just a contractor engineer in the area, I've been an applicant for WSRF grants, so Water Supply Reserve Fund grants. I've also been a contractor, and I'm also a fiscal agent for some grants. So to get to know the basin I live in, so I live in Southwest Basin's Roundtable. So it's basins because we are 9 sub-basins with 8 of our rivers leaving the state. So a little unique compared to other roundtables where they may have one main stem with a bunch of tributaries. We actually have 9 separate sub-basins. So that may reduce conflict or it may cause competition for funding because we're kind of using the same bucket for those 9 basins. We're also home to 2 federally recognized tribes in Southwest Colorado. So that's another unique thing about our area that's different than the rest of the state that allows us to collaborate in a different way. And then we serve 10 counties are included in the Roundtable area. And then even though we don't have any large trans-mountain diversions to the Front Range, we do have a couple different obligations that we serve down here. One's the San Juan Trauma Project, which is a trans-mountain diversion to the Rio Grande, where water is used in New Mexico, primarily down like in Albuquerque and those areas. And then of the 4 compacts that are in Colorado, one of the compacts is on our river, the La Plata River, and that's with New Mexico for delivery obligations. We also participate in recovery programs. Again, as Colorado, you guys know, as a headwater state, a lot of stuff might be not happening in our state, but our water contributes to those recovery programs. So we participate in those. And then my roundtable through the Basin Implementation Plan process has these kind of 7 guiding goals that are very straightforward. I mean, obviously balancing all needs, reducing conflict, supporting all of our water values. But that really helps guide the conversation and just really reground folks when we have these policy and planning developed discussions. And then down below, I just put our little website if you guys want to learn more. So get into my first kind of topic of Roundtable membership. As I mentioned, I joined the Roundtable in 2010. I was 2 years into being an engineer, so it was very intimidating to join the Roundtable and join a group of 30 plus professionals. But because our Roundtable, only meets quarterly, the meetings are only a few hours, it was really a great place to start and really was a low commitment to just attend a meeting every couple of months. Because of that, I was able to start networking with my basin. Everyone on the Roundtable is an expert in something. They're obviously in that chair and have that role for a reason. And so I think once you get to know your Roundtable more and who participates and those members, you probably have someone you could ask questions to. So usually if you had a question about something, someone at your Roundtable has probably dealt with a similar issue and can help guide you with that. As Jeff mentioned, a lot of state policies are talked about at the Roundtable since it's a grassroots effort. And I think this is a great way for you, even as not a voting member, to really learn about what policies are being pursued at a state level and then participating in those discussions of how those policies may impact your area. Every basin looks at policies different, and I think hearing from each other on how those impacts vary is really helpful. And then a good part of what the roundtables do is provide funding through the Water Supply Reserve Fund. And as a member, you're able to help support and review those grants. And then you're also able to create awareness about that funding opportunity for your community. Knowing what grants are available for projects that you support is a really great step to help get those completed and implemented. And then obviously, I have being a Roundtable member has led to a lot of job opportunities and great mentorships for me through that network. And here's just a little example of our agendas, but as you guys can see, they're pretty standardized. We talk about similar things every quarter, which I know some roundtables meet more often, but it really is a easy meeting to join that's not a huge commitment. And this is my slide on state water supply planning. Jeff's slide is much prettier with the pictures, but this will be an interesting way for me to tell the story a little differently than Jeff. And I want to focus everyone on that pink box, which is these are the 4 key elements of all these planning processes, is identifying what the demand is, either current or with those planning scenarios of 2050 horizon, understanding what water supply availability we have currently to meet those demands and what that supply may be in the future. And then there's going to be a gap between that. And we've known that for a long time, that lots of times our demand is more than what's available for water supply. And so really the roundtable's goals are to find solutions to meet those gaps. And that's really how this iterative process, that the 7 to 10 year process that we are underway right now, really is done. So really we started with that statewide, what I don't know what SWASI stands for, statewide sustainable, what is it, Jeff?
Statewide Water Supply Initiative.
Thank you. Statewide Water Supply Initiative. So the first one was completed in 2004, and that really focused on this demand supply gaps. And then that was updated. And in SWASI 2010 is really when the first projects list or identified projects and processes list was created that describes these solutions to meet those gaps. And in the SWASI iterations, we just planned for a 2050 planning horizon that was medium, high, and low. And so that was kind of the planning scenarios that we were using at that time. And all that technical information was built into the 2015 Basin Implementation Plans. And we took those projects lists, those solutions that we identified in 2010, and really built those out in 2015. And then that's all rolled into the water plan. And then from having a great projects list that identifies those solutions, the Colorado Water Conservation Board is then able to understand what kind of funding needs each basin has based on those proposed solutions, and is able to help create new funding revenues, such as the betting gambling revenue stream that we see now for the Colorado Water Plan grants. And it's just a really great foundation for all these other planning documents. So then in 2017, as Jeff mentioned, we pivoted to the analysis and technical update, which is really taking the data from SWASI 2010 and just improving it with all the new information we've learned, as well as providing more data and quantification for environmental and rec needs, so we can start really talking in the same terms regardless of what water value we're interested in. And then from there, we just repeated that whole process again. So the 2017 tech update went into the 2022 Basin Implementation Plans, which then become your foundation for your water plan update. And then looking ahead, we're now going to work on those no and low regret action plans. So this is just a fun little flow chart, but I think that really shows you how evolved we've been, and as well as how much each 4 of these little dots, you provide input on each one of those during these planning processes. And that's a way to engage. So with the Basin Implementation Plans, as I kind of mentioned, the demand, the supply, the gaps, and solutions is the key way to look at these. So really the purpose of those plans is to address those water supply gaps that we've identified through the tech update. And they are the foundation of the Colorado Water Plan. CWCB and the Roundtables value grassroots efforts. And so we really want to continue that, of making these plans be your plan for your basin with input from the Roundtable members as well as participants. And I think, why should you care about it, Biff, is really important. But the reasons are there's goals in there that are agreed upon by your local roundtable. So that keys you in right away on what their values are. And it's an easy way to understand what they are prioritizing. It also is giving you a lot of data. I think data really drives solutions, and it provides those planning scenarios that not everyday person can go afford to run a big climate change model. And so this is a great way to talk about future planning scenarios in common terms across the state. The most important part that's kept me busy this whole time is a list of water projects. This was first called the IPP list, which was the Identified Projects and Processes list. It moved on to the projects list, and now it's called the project database. And then lastly, I mentioned having these projects lists flushed out for CWCB allows them to pursue additional funding for us and create new funding revenues like the water plan grants. And I would say everyone's homework from this call should be in the basin you live in or the basin you want to work in. Go read the first few pages. It's called Basin Implementation Plan at a Glance. Each one of these plans has standardized table of contents. And so if you read those first 2 or 3 pages, you're going to know right away what your basin values and what challenges they've identified for their basin. This project database is really the meat of implementation of these plans. You provide projects that meet those goals as well as those gaps identified in the plans. The database is just a fun, messy spreadsheet with thousands of columns, or probably 30 columns, I think, in mine. And really you provide fields of what project type the name of your project, the location. And what I find is always key is you need that project champion that wants to work on this project from project conception all the way to implementation. And that's how you're successful. So if you have those things identified for your projects now, go check out the project database. I put the link in the header you can click on, and Chelsea will share this afterwards. But really go look and see what projects you have and poke around. And I think that'll really show you what projects are out there to meet those gaps. And then you can see if your projects have already been thought of or if you can find partners for your projects. An example of this is a map of my basin, and these pink dots are where we have projects, and then the pink lines are reaches that have projects. And this is just to show you the wide span of projects that we have across our whole basin. And they really range from, simple agricultural diversion improvements to a geothermal use project. So, or an education outreach type project, or a watershed planning project. So I think if you can identify a gap that you're meeting, a goal that you're meeting of the water plans or basin implementation plan, your project should be on this list to help us understand what folks are interested in their community. And then lastly, I was just going to talk about a few success stories of how I've worked together with the Roundtable. So the first one focuses on environmental and recreation needs. The 2015 Basin Implementation Plan, using that SWASI data from 2010, made us realize that we know a lot about agricultural, municipal, and industrial needs. We can quantify those. They've been measured for a long time, but we do not have that same knowledge about environmental and rec needs. And so our roundtable, because of the feedback we heard during that planning process of the Basin Implementation Plan, they identified these two kind of overarching goals that they called out in their executive summary of wanting to support projects that go out and quantify those environmental rec needs in our region, and then support projects that meet those gaps identified after you did that quantification. They felt like that was a big hole. That's what they heard from everyone across the board, from participation of the members versus public. And so they really put a charge to support that. And because of that, we have 4 different stream management or watershed planning processes going on now, 10 years later. So that's been a really good success. And that wouldn't have come about if we hadn't had a very long stakeholder process in that first basin implementation plan. The second one is the long gone turf removal idea. This is a fun photo. My boss is the one right here on the left, Steve Harris. And really we saw when we did the Basin Implementation Plan is, that gap for municipal supply in 2050. How do you really work on that when folks, already have low flow fixtures in their houses? They're already shutting off the water when they brush their teeth. And so really tackling that turf and that grass that you may only use when you mow it, you only touch it when you walk on it, maybe you should get that removed. And so this was our idea of how to focus on that and getting really that to meet that municipal demand in the future. And we worked with Ellen Roberts, our state's representative senator, to introduce Bill 15-008 that focused on integrating water conservation into land use planning. And so that's just another way to show how a concern was raised at the roundtable level during this planning process, and how we were able to move that through the process and through a policy to then become a Senate bill. And then the last one is kind of my history of how to work with the roundtable. I've been part of the teams for the Basin Implementation Plans and managing those project databases since 2013. And because of that, we've learned that there's a lot of need for capacity for any project to get implemented. And there's a need to help build access to funding. The everyday person, funding's pretty intimidating for them, and grant applications are. And so because of that, Southwestern Water Conservation District wanted to create a partnership that helped build capacity, provide access to funding, and organize our efforts. So we are working together instead of against each other when we compete for those funding opportunities. And through this role, they created the community navigator through this partnership. And one of my roles is to manage that project database and find projects that meet funding opportunities that are available. And so because all these projects were on this database, even though it's hundreds of projects along, I was able to query that database and find 17 projects I could bundle together to go after a federal application for $25 million. So there's a benefit to being on the list, even if you don't necessarily want to pursue CWCB funding. Folks are using that list to identify projects and needs. And I would say this is just another way to engage with your community. I think the roundtable spurs a lot of subcommittees or ad hoc committees. And so if you can't be on your roundtable, perhaps just joining one of those work groups might be a way for you to engage. So these are my recommendations moving forward of all the ways I've participated with the roundtable is really, you should go to some meetings. Most of them are hybrid now. Just tune in for a little bit. Just try to take a little chunk of your time that you can give up and start attending those meetings. And that's an easy way to get your face out there. And it's a low commitment, right? You don't have to apply to have a seat open. You can just attend virtually. Get your projects in the project database. We don't know what project needs are out there unless they're listed or someone tells you. And even if it's a concept idea, that's great. As long as you got a champion that's willing to answer phone calls and questions about that project, I think you should get it on that database and you can work with Jeff or your local roundtables for that. Another thing that I think moving forward, which is the perfect timing, is get your technical information you've collected and make sure you have that ready to tell the roundtable when they're doing these planning processes. A lot of folks don't, you don't know what you don't know. And in our rural communities, it's sometimes really hard to quantify those needs. And so if you have some local information that you've collected, it'd be great if you participate and let folks know about that and share that information. And then my last plug is the engagecwcb.org website has all of this information I went over, as well as all sorts of other great information if you want to learn more about the roundtable. And then my last slide is just my contact information. So I know I was really quick, but I talk fast always. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and please let me know if I forgot anything that you guys would like to cover.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We'll open it up for questions. Shannon?
Carrie, I just wanted to, if you could talk about the funding that has come in through the partnership and what that's looked like and the bundling of projects. I know that some of it certainly is still frozen, but if you could just give an overview of that,
Sure.
that would be helpful.
Yeah, so through the funding, the partnership received a local capacity grant through CWCB to pursue federal funding opportunities. And so I've applied for 2 grants that are in the federal arena. One was a water strategy grant through reclamation, and we tried to propose that bundle approach. And we were not successful with that grant. That grant obviously wanted site-specific information. But then the second one we applied for was the Upper Colorado Drought Mitigation, the B2E grant that everyone talked about. And that's where I bundled 17 projects and we applied for $25 million. And we were awarded that grant. And we heard a positive email being awarded that, but we have not heard anything since. And I know that all those funds have been frozen. We haven't given up hope for that grant, but we were successful at least showing that bundling projects and going after a grant together versus separately can be a successful thing. We had like 37 letters of support in that grant application. I learned a lot about trying to write 17 different budgets and putting them all together in one single grant budget, as well as like 17 maps. So I have a lot of lessons learned. If anyone wants to talk about how to bundle a bunch of projects, I'd be happy to share the highs and lows of doing that in a short 12-week process. But yeah, and I think moving forward, we're going to hopefully some federal funding is going to show up in January. We're interested in pursuing maybe an RCPP with NRCS, maybe partnering with some forest health. I think that's an area that we could really start working more with water and making those connections. And then really focusing more on the basins I didn't get in my first bundle, trying to be equitable and across my whole watershed.
Thanks, Carrie. Scott, do you have a question?
Carrie, you kind of touched on this, but I've heard folks talk about the roundtables being, this collection of water experts and can be somewhat intimidating at times, especially for somebody kind of either newer in their career or newer to water, or maybe not as well versed as they might want to be. Do you have any thoughts or strategies on how to approach that if somebody's coming from that place? How do we engage in the roundtable? Because
I
yeah,
think showing up is probably the first step. If people get used to seeing your face there, they're going to be like, oh, Scott keeps attending. What's he doing? Our roundtable does a social hour 30 minutes before the meetings. And if you go to that, that's a great way to kind of just introduce yourself to maybe one person and talk. I was fortunate enough that my boss, Steve Harris, is a legislation appointee on the roundtable. And so he kind of just took me in and just took me through it all. So if you have a friend that goes, that might be another great way, is just have them introduce you to folks. But I think for most roundtables, it's if they get to see your face a few times, they're going to want to talk to you. I know hybrid's great, and I said Zoom might be easy because it's hard. Our days are busy, and if you don't get paid to go to a meeting, you might not choose to go. So hybrid might be your first step, but really just being a presence, I think, is the first way to go. And then applying for funding is another great way to get in. If you have a project that could use that funding, you should use CWCB funding for some source of your project match. Their grant application is straightforward. I think and you have great people, you have great representatives to talk to in each basin that can help you. And that's another great way to start to get plugged in, and then you kind of have ownership of that process because you care, because you're affected, your funding. I don't know if Jeff has any other tips.
Yeah.
I think those were really great. I was actually just going to chime in and turn that one back on you, Scott, and see what you think about that, particularly the Metro and South Platte basins that I think you're pretty involved in. I was just kind of curious, as someone who's sort of like a rising leader in the Basin Roundtable space, what your thoughts on that are.
I would agree with Carrie. I think showing up is a great place to start, and it's not easy to show up to a room of strangers necessarily, but like Carrie said, introduce yourself. And I think in general, the water community is very welcoming to folks. And if you need a friend on the South Platte Basin Roundtable, reach out because I'd love to introduce you to everyone there. But personally, I've really found involvement with the roundtable to be really rewarding and can't recommend it highly enough. And I think wherever you are in your career, it's a great opportunity to meet folks in the same space in the water sector and to network and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think both what Carrie and Scott said are right on. I'm pretty fortunate where my job is interacting with the Basin Roundtables, so I didn't really have a choice. But when I started at CWCB, I have been working sort of like auxiliary to water, with water as a focus just generally across my career before I took this job at CWCB. So stepping into my first Basin Roundtable meeting, super intimidated. I was really intimidated. Here I was, here to be the state's representative to the Basin Roundtables. And I, walk into that room and there's a lot of folks who've been working in water for, basically my lifetime, 30 plus years. And so I'm, expected to be somewhat knowledgeable. And I think what I found was that all of those folks are really interested in sort of ushering in the next generation of water leaders. They might not be really proactive about it, but I think showing up is really the first step, and you'll see they're really interested in what folks are thinking about and interested in. And so I think, yeah, showing up, if you got to go virtually, that's one thing. I would say at least try to get to one in person, because there's a lot of conversations that happen outside of kind of in between agenda items, or, in the social hour before or at dinner after. So show up, ask questions during the meeting, after, sit by someone you don't know. I think all of those things are really good strategies.
Yeah, we do dinner at the South Platte Forum, and it's good.
And I'll just plug those meetings that I highlighted before that River Network will be presenting at. We're going to be highlighting projects that your organizations may be leading, and the successes. So that could be a really good way to come out if you've never been before, is to join one of those upcoming meetings.
Yeah, on that note, I think if you're doing projects in a basin or leading projects in a basin, reach out to the Basin Roundtables and just say, hey, we're doing this project, whether you've got funding through them or not. I think they really do. Most of them love to know what's happening around the basin if they don't already. So that's a good way too. They are really interested in project presentations and things like that. So if there's a great project you're really excited about, whether you need funding or not now, potentially open a door for some funding in the future. But yeah, that's another way to engage.
Any other questions out there? Okay. If not, I'm going to drop this evaluation in the chat. It'll take you 1 minute. We really value your feedback, but I really want to thank Carrie and Jeff for your amazing presentations. I personally learned a lot, and I hope that this will inspire this group and others too to become more engaged with your local Basin Roundtable. So with that, I'll let you all head out 5 minutes early. I'll stick around in case anybody has any last minute questions, but thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.